It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to escape the suffocating chaos of living with my cousins in Pasay. When I found the ad for the studio apartment in Manila, it seemed perfect. Cheap, accessible by jeepney to my call center job, and most importantly, quiet. After signing the lease, I couldn't believe my luck. I didn't question why the rent was so low, or why the landlord seemed almost eager to hand over the keys. The first night, I barely noticed the chill. It was Manila after all, and the air conditioning unit was ancient. I ignored the flickering light in the bathroom and the faint, sour smell that seemed to cling to the corners of the room. Exhausted from moving, I collapsed onto the mattress, not even bothering to unpack. Somewhere in the haze of sleep, I heard it, a soft scraping sound, like nails dragging across wood. My eyes snapped open, but the room was still. I sat up, heart pounding, listening for any hint of movement. Nothing. Just the distant hum of traffic outside. I convinced myself it was the pipes or the old wall settling. The following morning, the bathroom mirror was smeared with dark streaks, like dirty fingerprints. I scrubbed it away, convinced it was just residue from the last tenant. As I cleaned, I noticed the scratches on the doorframe, almost like claw marks. Unease started to curl around my stomach, but I pushed it away. I had work to get to. That night, the noises returned. Scratching, scraping, something heavy dragging across the floor above. I banged on the ceiling with a broomstick, but the sounds only grew louder, more frantic. I thought about calling the landlord, but it was late. I pulled the covers over my head, whispering prayers to drown out the noise. In the morning, I found muddy footprints leading from the door to my bed. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My heart raced every time I walked through the door, expecting to find someone, something, waiting inside. I started double-locking the door and keeping the windows shut tight, even though the heat became unbearable. One night, after a grueling shift, I came home to find the lights flickering. The sour smell was stronger, almost like rotten meat. As I stepped inside, I saw it. The bathroom door was wide open, and the mirror was smeared with fresh handprints, as if someone had pressed their bloody palms against the glass. My hands trembled as I dialed the landlord's number. It rang and rang, but no one picked up. I wanted to leave, but where would I go? I was broke, and moving out wasn't an option. So I did the only thing I could think of. I cleaned the mirror again, wiping away the dark, sticky residue. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a kitchen knife. At around 2 a.m., the noises started again. This time, it wasn't just scratching. It was a low, mournful wailing, like someone trapped behind the walls. I covered my ears, tears streaming down my face, but the sound only grew louder, more desperate. When dawn finally broke, I forced myself to investigate. I followed the sound to the corner of the room where the smell was strongest. Moving the dresser, I found a loose panel in the wall. My hands shook as I pried it open, revealing a small, dark space, a crawl space. Inside, I found a pile of rotting clothes, a broken phone, and a photo. It was a selfie, taken by a girl with long black hair, her eyes wide and terrified. The same girl I had seen once, briefly, in the building lobby. Panic gripped me as I stared at the photo. I couldn't stop myself from scrolling through the broken phone, the cracked screen flickering like a dying flame. The last text message sent from it was to an unknown number, Help. He's coming. A loud crash from the living room made me drop the phone. My breathing turned shallow, and the stench of decay seemed to wrap itself around me like a suffocating blanket. I crept to the doorway, peeking out, and saw the figure, a hunched, shadowy silhouette, dragging itself across the floor. It moved in jerky, unnatural motions, its head snapping up when I gasped. The face was twisted, swollen, half decayed. Her face, the girl from the photo. Only now, her mouth was wide open, gaping unnaturally as a hoarse, rasping sound escaped. I backed into the bathroom, locking the door, my hands shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the knife. "Leave," her distorted voice rasped through the door, followed by the sound of nails dragging across it. I sank to the floor, covering my ears, as the door rattled. The smell intensified, making me gag. The sound stopped suddenly, replaced by whispering, my name, over and over. When the noise finally stopped, I unlocked the door, praying it was over. The room was empty. The only evidence of the haunting was the broken phone, now lying in the center of the room, its screen showing a single word: run. That night, I slept in a cheap motel. The next day, I found a new apartment and moved out without telling the landlord. A week later, I saw a news article. The landlord had been arrested, suspected of killing his girlfriend in that very apartment and hiding her body in the crawl space. I never went back. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear that rasping voice whispering my name. I moved to Cebu, hoping for a fresh start, away from the cramped, gossip-filled barangay where everyone knew my business. When I found the small apartment for rent, it seemed almost perfect, cheap, spacious enough for just me, and right next to a funeral home. At first, I thought it was a bit strange, but as a traditional healer, I figured it would be convenient. After all, I had often been called to perform rites for the departed. The landlord seemed relieved when I signed the lease, almost like he didn't expect anyone to take it. On my first night, as I unpacked my herbs and tools, I heard the faint sound of wailing from the funeral home next door. I brushed it off. It wasn't unusual to hear grieving families. I lit some sage, murmured a quick blessing, and went to sleep. But the next night was different. The wailing grew louder, almost frantic. I glanced out the window and saw the funeral home's lights flickering. A chill crept down my spine. I wrapped my shawl tighter around me and whispered a prayer. Over the next few days, the noise got worse. It wasn't just crying anymore. It was scratching, shuffling, and low, guttural moans. One night, as I prepared for bed, I noticed a faint knocking on the wall. I pressed my ear against it, listening. It wasn't rhythmic. It was desperate, like someone trying to get out. The next morning, I went to the funeral home to see if something was wrong. The caretaker, Mang looked at me with sunken, tired eyes. "May mga kaluluwa na hindi matahimik," he whispered. He told me that the last few bodies brought in hadn't been blessed properly. Families had rushed through the rites, leaving the souls wandering, angry and confused. I offered to help, but Tonyo shook his head. "Walang silbi. Marami ng ganyan. Hindi lang dito. Parang may sumpa." That night, I set up my altar and began a ritual of protection. I sprinkled salt at every corner and burned blessed incense. I could feel the heavy, oppressive energy lift, if only slightly. Just as I was about to relax, a loud thud hit my door. I rushed to open it, only to find a young boy standing there, pale and shivering. He didn't speak. His lips were cracked and dry, his eyes hollow. I reached out, but my hand went right through him. He vanished, leaving behind a small, bloody handprint on the doorknob. I barely slept that night, too afraid to close my eyes. At dawn, I gathered my ritual tools and set up a protective circle in the center of the room. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and the smell of rotting flowers lingered, no matter how much incense I burned. I chanted the prayer of light, my hands trembling as I sprinkled holy water around the apartment. As the final words left my lips, the room grew unnaturally cold. A whisper, like a gust of wind, brushed past my ear. "Tulungan mo kami. Help us." I froze, heart pounding. The voice wasn't just one, it was many, overlapping, pleading. I forced myself to continue the ritual, lighting a white candle at the altar. Suddenly, the flame shot up, turning dark red, and a gust of wind extinguished it. My heart sank as I realized something had gone terribly wrong. A loud banging erupted from the walls, like fists pounding from the inside. Shadows slithered across the floor, forming human-like shapes with hollow, gaping eyes. One by one, they began to whisper my name, their voices blending into a mournful, angry chant. Just as I thought I would faint from fear, the door burst open. Mantonio stumbled in, clutching a rosary. He began chanting, his voice firm despite the terror in his eyes. The shadows hissed, retreating, but I could feel their anger intensify. "They're not just restless," Mantonio gasped. "They're hungry. You've awakened something older, something that feeds on the grief of the dead." Mantonio and I bolted the door, but we knew it wouldn't hold for long. The shadows outside pounded against the wood, their cries growing more desperate and vicious. I held the candle in my shaking hands, praying it would reignite, but the wick remained cold and dead. "We need to finish the ritual," I whispered. Mantonio shook his head. "This isn't a simple haunting anymore. You called them here. They're bound to you now." I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "What do you mean?" He glanced at the altar. "You didn't just awaken them. You offered yourself as their bridge. You became the medium." The banging grew louder, and the shadows seeped under the doorframe, clawing at the floor. I gritted my teeth and picked up the rosary Mantonio had dropped. As I whispered a prayer, the temperature dropped again, and a voice rasped from the shadows. "Hunger, so much hunger. Give us peace, or give us flesh." Suddenly, one of the shadowy forms solidified into the young boy I had seen before. This time, his eyes were bleeding, his mouth twisted in a silent scream. He lunged at me, and I stumbled backward, the rosary slipping from my grasp. Mantonio yanked me up and pulled me to the center of the circle, where he started a cleansing chant. The shadows writhed, but the boy remained. His bony hands reached out, and I felt a piercing cold dig into my chest. Mantonio splashed holy water on the boy, and he disintegrated into ash, but the others did not retreat. "They want your soul," Mantonio warned. "You're the one who called them. You have to send them back." I took a deep breath and knelt at the altar. I recited the prayer of deliverance, begging for mercy for the souls trapped in the void. As I finished the last verse, the shadows flickered, their forms shifting, melting into the floor. The room grew warmer, and the oppressive air lightened. Just as I thought it was over, the candle suddenly reignited, its flame blazing bright. The boy's face appeared again, this time calm, almost peaceful. He mouthed a single word, "Salamat," before vanishing completely. When dawn broke, I left the apartment, Mang Tonyo at my side. The funeral home was eerily silent, and the air felt lighter than it had in weeks. As we stepped outside, I saw the landlord approaching, his face pale and drawn. He didn't need to say anything. I knew he had felt it too. That was the last night I spent in that apartment. I never looked back, but sometimes, late at night, I hear faint wailing in the distance, and I wonder if I really freed them, or just sent them somewhere worse. I never thought I'd get the place. Davao's real estate prices were through the roof, but when I stumbled on the ad for the newly built complex, I jumped on it. Modern design, central location, and surprisingly affordable rent. It felt too good to be true. The landlord seemed a bit odd. He kept glancing over his shoulder, muttering about the night shift. I figured he just didn't like students, but when he practically shoved the keys into my hands and left without saying goodbye, I felt a twinge of unease. My first night was uneventful. I spent most of it setting up my gaming rig, ordering food and enjoying the solitude. Around midnight, I decided to explore the corridors. They were long, stretching in both directions, dimly lit by sleek, modern sconces. As I walked, I noticed something weird. No windows, just endless hallways. I brushed it off, chalking it up to modern architecture. The first real scare came on the third night. I woke up to a banging sound, like someone pounding on metal. I checked the hallway through the peephole. Nothing. Just as I was about to go back to bed, the lights flickered and turned red. A wave of nausea hit me, and I stumbled back into my room. I tried calling the landlord, but the line was dead. Then I heard it. A scream, raw and animalistic, echoing from the corridor. My stomach tightened. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't help myself. I opened the door, just a crack. A figure stood in the hallway, hunched over, its skin peeling in bloody ribbons. It turned its head. Its eyes were hollow, dripping with something dark and viscous. I slammed the door, my heart hammering. I could hear it scraping against the wood, whispering my name in a raspy, inhuman voice. I pushed my desk against the door, praying it would hold. Then I heard more screams. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all blending into a cacophony of pain. I crouched on the floor, hands over my ears, trying to drown it out. Hours seemed to pass, and just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the red light flickered and returned to normal. I stayed in my room until sunrise. When morning finally came, I ventured out, bleary-eyed and paranoid. The hallway looked normal again, bright, clean, devoid of any trace of the nightmare. I knocked on my neighbor's door, hoping someone else had witnessed the madness. An old woman answered, her eyes wary. When I asked about the red light, her expression grew tense. She shook her head. No one talks about it. Best to leave it alone. Just keep your doors locked at night. Before I could press her further, she shut the door, the sound echoing ominously. I headed to the building admin office, but it was closed. Frustrated, I decided to dig around online. A forum post caught my eye. Someone had stayed in the same building years ago. They mentioned the red corridor, the distorted figures, and how no one seemed to remember anything the next morning. One comment suggested it was a curse from an old construction accident. Workers buried alive under the foundation, their spirits trapped in the endless corridors. That night, I braced myself. I set up a camera facing the hallway and waited, every muscle tensed. Midnight came, and as expected, the light flickered and turned red. I watched through the peephole as shadows began to move, twisting, crawling, merging with the crimson walls. Then, I heard it again, a pounding on my door. This time, I didn't look. I focused on the screen, heart thudding as I watched the recording live. The figure appeared, skin flayed, eyes hollow, and it slammed itself against my door. My camera glitched, distorting the image, but I caught a glimpse of the thing leaning close to the lens, its mouth opening impossibly wide, as if screaming. I couldn't hear it, but I felt it, a pressure, like the air itself was screaming. Then, the power went out. I stayed frozen, not daring to breathe. When the lights returned to normal, I checked the footage. The recording was corrupted, nothing but static and faint whispers. I spent the entire day packing. My mind was made up. I needed to leave. The apartment complex was cursed, and whatever happened here was far beyond my understanding. I couldn't stay another night, but as darkness fell, a heavy sense of dread settled over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something would go wrong. As I dragged my suitcase to the door, the lights flickered. My heart dropped. I fumbled with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. I pounded on the door, desperation clawing at me. Then, it happened. The lights turned crimson. A deep, resonant groan echoed through the corridor, followed by the sound of dragging footsteps. I peeked through the peephole, and there it was, the flayed figure. But this time it wasn't alone. Dozens of distorted, bleeding forms filled the hallway, their mouths stretched open in eternal screams. My phone buzzed, a text from the landlord. "Don't try to leave. They won't let you. Survive the night, and they might spare you." The pounding on the door began, louder than ever. I could hear the wood splintering. I pushed my desk against the door, barricading it as best I could. My phone buzzed again. This time, a video file. I hesitated, but played it. It was a recording from the night before, from my own camera. The figure at the door wasn't a stranger. It was me, covered in blood, pounding, screaming to be let in. I dropped the phone, panic racing through me. My own voice began to echo through the corridor, overlapping with the other wails. I looked around the room, trying to make sense of the nightmare. The window was my only chance. I pried it open, squeezing through just as the door gave way. One of the creatures grabbed my leg, its hands ice cold and impossibly strong. I kicked it away, scraping my knee on the concrete ledge. I climbed down the fire escape, hearing the distorted voices chanting my name. As I reached the ground, I looked up to see the window to my unit. Red light spilling out, and something that looked like me staring down, grinning. I ran until I reached the main road, flagging down a taxi. As we sped away, I glanced back one last time. The building looked normal, just as it had during the day. No sign of the horror I had endured. When I checked my phone, the video was gone. The landlord never responded to my calls. I found another place far from that cursed complex, but at night, I still hear the pounding on my door, and sometimes I catch a glimpse of my own reflection, bleeding, screaming, just like that night. I was the first tenant to move into the new Hillside apartment. It was a stunning location, overlooking the thick forest of Baguio. The air was crisp, the scent of pine ever present. I was proud of the building. I had designed it myself, balancing modern aesthetics with the natural landscape. We had to clear a few old trees, but it was necessary progress. Or so I thought. The first night was quiet, but I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, a strange glow flickered outside my window. I peeked through the blinds and saw dozens of fireflies, dancing in intricate patterns. I smiled, thinking it was a blessing from nature itself. Little did I know it was the first warning. The next morning, I found muddy footprints on the hallway floor. I cursed the construction crew, assuming they had left a mess. As I cleaned, I noticed something odd. Root-like tendrils sticking out of the cracks between the tiles. I pulled one free, but a dark, viscous sap oozed out, staining my hands. I scrubbed at it until my skin turned red. The second night, I heard scratching at my door. I yanked it open, but the hallway was empty, save for a pile of dead leaves. As I turned to close the door, I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes watching me from the darkness. They blinked once, then faded. The next morning, my first tenant arrived, a young couple from Manila. They seemed happy to be there, but that night, I heard screaming from their unit. I rushed over, banging on the door. When they finally opened it, they looked bewildered, claiming they hadn't heard anything. As I made my way back to my unit, I saw muddy footprints leading from their door to the edge of the forest. I hesitated, but curiosity won. I followed the trail until I reached a small clearing where we had cut down the old trees. The ground was cracked and dry, and the air felt suffocating. I noticed something buried in the dirt, an old wooden carving of a tikbalang, half broken, its face etched with pain. I picked it up, and suddenly, the fireflies swarmed me, circling my head in a dizzying vortex. My vision blurred, and I stumbled back, clutching the figure. I stumbled back into my apartment, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands were still shaking from the encounter in the clearing. I set the wooden carving on the table and poured myself a drink, but the liquid in the glass looked strange, darker, thicker. I sniffed it and nearly gagged. It smelled like the sap from the roots. Just then, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They were slow, heavy, dragging. I peeked through the peephole and saw the young couple from earlier, but something was wrong. Their movements were jerky, their heads twitching unnaturally. I watched in horror as they turned towards my door, their eyes glowing faintly like the fireflies. They began to scratch at the door, their nails scraping against the wood. I backed away, heart pounding, when suddenly the lights flickered and went out. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. That's when I saw it. The carving had started to ooze dark sap, pooling around its base. A loud banging erupted from the walls, as if the entire building was under attack. I could hear muffled screams from other units, followed by unnatural silence. I pressed my ear to the wall, and faintly, I heard whispers. They spoke of the forest, of being buried, of their roots being severed. Desperate, I grabbed the carving and ran to the hallway. The couple stood there, motionless, their heads cocked at unnatural angles. As I moved past them, they turned in unison, following me without blinking. I dashed down the stairs, the fireflies swarming around me, their glow pulsing like a heartbeat. I burst into the lobby and found the caretaker, slumped against the wall, his eyes glazed over. I shook him, but he didn't respond. His hands were covered in sap, and his mouth hung open, leaking the same dark substance. I stumbled out of the building and looked back. The entire complex was covered in fireflies, the windows glowing faintly as if alive. I glanced at the carving in my hand, and for the first time, I noticed the inscription carved into its base. Ang galit ng kagubatan ay walang kapatawaran. The wrath of the forest has no forgiveness. I didn't know where to go. The entire hillside seemed alive, pulsating with that eerie glow. I stumbled down the road, clutching the wooden carving, trying to make sense of what I had unleashed. Then, I heard it, a low, rumbling growl, like an animal circling its prey. I turned around, and there they were, the young couple, followed by other tenants, all moving in that unnatural, twitchy way, eyes glowing like fireflies. Behind them, towering above the building, was a massive figure, half human, half horse, its eyes burning bright in the darkness. A tikbalang. Its long limbs stretched unnaturally as it reached toward the apartment complex, vines sprouting from its back, wrapping around the windows and doors. I tried to run, but roots shot out of the ground, wrapping around my legs, pulling me down. The fireflies swarmed me, landing on my skin, their tiny legs prickling like needles. I struggled, clawing at the ground, but the earth seemed to swallow me. A voice, deep and ancient, resonated through the air. Binaliwala mo ang kagubatan. Ngayon, ikaw ang magiging isa sa amin. You disregarded the forest. Now, you will become one of us. I screamed, the sap oozing from my skin, merging with the roots. I felt my bones creak and stretch, my vision darkening. The last thing I saw was the young couple bending down, their faces inches from mine, whispering, "You are part of the forest now." When I opened my eyes, it was daylight. The building was pristine, the forest calm and silent. I looked at my hands, rough, bark-like, with tendrils wrapped around my wrists. I couldn't move from where I was rooted to the ground. A bird landed on my shoulder, chirping cheerfully, as if unaware that I was no longer human. One by one, new tenants arrived, and the cycle began again. I could only watch as the hillside reclaimed them, one by one, turning them into puppets of the forest. My roots grew deeper, the fireflies circling above, their glow a constant reminder of the wrath I had awakened. I don't know how much time passed. Days, months, maybe even years. I was rooted to the ground, part of the forest, my body entangled in vines and branches. I could see the world around me, but everything was filtered through the pulsating rhythm of nature itself. The fireflies continued their haunting dance, and the spirits whispered their grievances through the leaves. One night, when the fireflies gathered closer than ever before, a strange sensation washed over me. A warmth, a pull, like being lifted out of a deep sleep. I blinked, and suddenly, I was lying on the ground, my limbs weak and my body free from the tangled roots. I looked around, disoriented, as the morning sun broke through the trees. Slowly, I stood up, expecting the familiar weight of the curse, but nothing happened. I looked at my hands, human again. No rough bark or sap. My heart raced, and I couldn't believe it. Was it really over? I staggered back to the apartment complex, which was now in ruins, overtaken by greenery. There were no signs of the tenants or the spirits, just nature, peaceful and undisturbed. As I wandered through the crumbling hallways, I wondered if it had all been a long, torturous dream. Back in town, people seemed surprised to see me. A few whispered my name, Others avoided eye contact. I learned that I had been missing for years. They said I had gone mad and wandered into the forest, never to return. No one believed me when I spoke of the curse or the forest reclaiming me. They just looked at me with pity. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint hum of fireflies outside my window, and I wonder if I truly escaped, or if the forest simply decided to let me go. When I heard about the old apartment building slated for demolition, I knew it would be the perfect subject for my next film. Quezon City had its share of ghost stories, but this place had a reputation. A labyrinth of hallways that seemed to change shape, a history of disappearances, and most famously, the spiral staircase that never ended. The landlord was reluctant to let me in. He kept muttering something about the top floor being off limits, but I convinced him by promising to give the building a proper send-off before the wrecking ball arrived. I set up my camera and recording equipment on the first night, eager to capture the eerie atmosphere. The layout made no sense. The hallways curved unnaturally, sometimes looping back to where I started. I found doors that led to nowhere, just brick walls behind them. The spiral staircase in the center was the only way up, but it seemed to stretch forever into the shadows. I decided to film there the next day. The first night was uneventful. I reviewed the footage and noticed something odd. Doors that had been closed when I filmed them were wide open. I played it back, frame by frame, but it didn't make sense. I heard faint scratching on the audio, but there was no source. The second night, I started exploring the staircase. The air grew colder as I ascended, and the steps seemed to twist more than they should. After what felt like an hour, I reached the third floor, except when I opened the door, I found myself back on the first floor. My own gear was right there where I had left it. I checked my watch. 2 hours had passed. Panic gnawed at me, but I needed the footage. I rewound the camera. Nothing but static and distorted whispers. Then I heard it. A voice, faint and pleading. "Don't go to the top." I couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept looping back to the voice on the recording, warning me not to go to the top. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an echo from an old tenant or a glitch in the audio. But deep down, I knew something was wrong with the building itself. The next evening, I decided to investigate further. I armed myself with more equipment, motion sensors, a handheld camera, and my flashlight. I took a deep breath and headed back to the staircase. The steps felt longer this time. I counted each one, but the numbers didn't add up. I reached what should have been the second floor, but the door led to a dark, musty corridor I hadn't seen before. Old, crumbling wallpaper peeled away from the walls, revealing strange symbols etched underneath. The whispers started again, louder this time. I pressed on, documenting every step. When I opened the next door, I found myself back on the ground floor, but everything looked different. Darker, older. Dust covered the walls, and the faint smell of rot permeated the air. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see a figure standing at the base of the stairs. Tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes. He moved slowly, his head jerking at odd angles, like a marionette with broken strings. I stepped back, and he whispered, "You can't reach the top." No one does. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. The figure moved closer, dragging one foot behind him, his head twitching violently. I turned and sprinted up the stairs, my legs burning as I pushed onward. I didn't stop until I reached the next floor, slamming the door behind me. Panting, I looked around. The hallway stretched longer than before, the walls pulsating like they were breathing. I glanced at my camera. It was still recording, but the screen showed something else entirely. Dozens of faces, screaming silently, pressed against a transparent barrier. My phone buzzed. A text from the landlord. "If you're still inside, get out. The building isn't just haunted. It's alive. It feeds on those who climb the stairs." I didn't know what to believe anymore. The building felt like it was squeezing me, like a giant rotting lung. I couldn't stop thinking about the landlord's message. The building isn't just haunted, it's alive. I glanced at the staircase, dreading the next step, but knowing I couldn't just leave. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I needed to understand. I tightened my grip on the camera and forced myself upward. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to curve inward, like a twisted spine. I counted the floors as I climbed, but the numbers didn't make sense. 3, 5, 2, 7. I pushed open a door, hoping for a way out, but I found myself in a room filled with old, broken furniture and mirrors. The walls were covered in them, all reflecting my own terrified face. I moved closer to one and noticed that my reflection wasn't matching my movements. Instead, it grinned, baring yellowed, jagged teeth. I stumbled back, knocking over a dusty chair. A whisper filled the room. They tried to leave. Now they're part of the building. The door slammed shut behind me, and the mirrors started vibrating, like something on the other side was trying to break through. I bolted to the door, yanking it open just as a crack appeared in the largest mirror, a pale, clawed hand pushing through. I fled up the stairs, legs burning, lungs heaving. I didn't know how many floors I passed, but when I stopped, I found myself on a landing that looked familiar. There was a faded mural on the wall, spirals and twisted faces blending into one another. I reached out to touch it, and the wall seemed to breathe under my hand. Then, I heard it. The landlord's voice, but distorted, like a recording played backward. "If you reach the top, you'll never come back." A door creaked open at the end of the hallway, revealing a faint light. I hesitated, torn between curiosity and terror. I knew I shouldn't, but I took a step forward, then another. Drawn to the flickering glow, the door slammed behind me, and I realized I was at the top floor. Except, the layout was impossibly vast, stretching endlessly with doors that led to nowhere. In the center was a spiral pattern etched into the floor, pulsing like a heartbeat. I stepped closer, and the air around me grew thick, suffocating. I felt something tugging at my mind, like invisible hands pulling me into the pattern. The whispers grew louder, chanting my name. I looked down at my camera. The screen was filled with static, but I could see glimpses of the building consuming people, pulling them into the walls, their faces merging with the brick, eyes wide and frozen. I knew if I didn't leave, I would become one of them. Gathering my strength, I forced myself to run. I didn't stop until I burst through the ground floor door, gasping for air. I didn't look back. I just kept running, even as the whispers chased me down the street. The next day, I returned with the police, but the building was gone. Just an empty lot filled with weeds. I replayed the footage later, but there was nothing but static and one final frame. My own terrified face, pressed against a cracked window, as if begging to be let out. I thought coming back to Tacloban would give me some peace. Years had passed since Typhoon Yolanda, but the memories never left me. Water crashing through windows, screams, the relentless howling wind. I had survived, but my family hadn't. I was the only one left. When I found the new apartment complex built on the old residential area, I thought it was a sign, a chance to start over. The building looked modern, clean, and surprisingly affordable. I should have known that something was wrong. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. No neighbors, no traffic, just the constant hum of the fluorescent lights in the hallway. I unpacked in silence, trying not to think about what had happened here before. Just as I was about to sleep, I heard it, a faint, mournful wailing. It sounded like a child crying, but when I opened the door, the hallway was empty. I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Trauma lingering. But the next night, it started again. This time louder. Wails, screams, the sound of rushing water. I pressed my ear against the wall, and it was like listening to the past, a symphony of despair. I whispered prayers, hoping the noise would stop, but it didn't. At dawn, I noticed something. Wet footprints leading from my door to the hallway. I followed them, my pulse racing, and found a trail of water pooling in front of the elevator. As I wiped my eyes, convinced I was hallucinating, I saw them. Dozens of shadowy figures, soaked and shivering, standing at the end of the corridor. I blinked, and they were gone. I barely slept after that night. I kept the lights on, clutching my rosary, whispering prayers to calm my nerves. By morning, I convinced myself that the stress of being back had messed with my head, but the water stains remained, seeping into the carpet like fresh wounds. The landlord stopped by that afternoon, noticing me cleaning the hallway. I asked him if anyone else had complained about noises at night. He just gave me a tired look and muttered, "You're not the first." Some tenants don't stay long. I pressed him for more, but he wouldn't say anything else. That night, I was determined to stay awake and catch whatever was causing the disturbances. I set up my phone to record the hallway, leaving it propped against the door. Then I waited, forcing myself to stay alert. At exactly 2:37 a.m., it started. The faint sound of rushing water, then muffled screams. I peeked through the peephole. Nothing. I opened the door cautiously, phone still recording, and froze. The entire hallway was submerged. Dark, murky water swirled around my ankles, dragging pieces of debris and soaked toys past my feet. I tried to move, but it felt like something was holding me back. The wailing grew louder, echoing through the corridor, and that's when I saw them. The figures from before, crawling through the water, their eyes hollow and dripping. One of them reached for me, a woman with seaweed tangled in her hair, her skin pale and bloated. Her mouth opened wide, and water poured out, splashing against my legs. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut. My heart pounded as I pressed my back against the wood, listening to the sound of waves crashing just outside. When I dared to check the footage later, the video showed nothing but a normal, dry hallway, except for one frame, a pale, bloated face pressed against the lens, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The building itself seemed to be alive, pulsing with the grief and terror of the storm. The next morning, I gathered my courage and knocked on my neighbor's door. An elderly man answered, his eyes tired and wary. "Did you hear it last night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I hear them every night. The people who didn't make it. They call out for help, but no one listens. You should leave while you still can." I wanted to ask more, but he closed the door, and I was left standing in the hallway, more confused than ever. I decided to dig deeper. I spent hours in the local library, poring over news articles about the typhoon. The building had been constructed on what was once a temporary evacuation center, one that had flooded during the storm, trapping dozens inside. That night, I prepared for whatever might come. I set up my phone to record again and kept the rosary close. Midnight came and went, but nothing happened. Just as I began to relax, I heard it, a faint sobbing, right outside my door. I gathered my courage and opened it a crack. The hallway was empty, but the air was thick, suffocating. Suddenly, I heard a whisper, soft and broken. "Tulungan mo kami." Help us. A cold draft blew past me, carrying the scent of seawater and decay. I looked down and saw water pooling at my feet, but this time, it wasn't just water. It was thick, dark, and smelled of rot. I tried to move, but my legs felt heavy, like they were sinking into the floor. The sobbing grew louder, turning into anguished screams. I turned back to my room, but the door was gone, just a wall where it had been. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized I was trapped in the hallway. Figures began to appear, their faces gaunt, eyes lifeless, skin bloated and peeling. One of them stepped forward, a young boy, his clothes soaked and torn. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his swollen face. "Bakit mo kami iniwan? Why did you leave us?" My knees buckled, and I collapsed to the floor, clutching the rosary, whispering prayers. The figures crowded closer, their hands reaching for me, their voices overlapping in a chaotic chorus of grief and anger. Just as they were about to touch me, the landlord's voice boomed through the hallway. "You have to pray for them. They're looking for peace." I forced myself to my feet, tears streaming down my face, and began to pray out loud, reciting the rosary. The spirits hesitated, their forms flickering. One by one, they faded, their cries growing softer, like a receding wave. As the last figure vanished, the hallway returned to normal, dry, quiet, almost peaceful. I slid to the floor, exhausted and shaken, but grateful to be alive. I knew then that I couldn't leave. Not yet. If the spirits were trapped, it was because they still hadn't been given a proper farewell. I made it my mission to pray for them, every night, hoping to guide them toward the light. The next night, I gathered my strength and prepared to perform a full prayer vigil. I lit candles at every corner of the apartment and placed a bowl of holy water by the door. I spent the day collecting flowers from the nearby memorial garden, arranging them around the small makeshift altar I had created. As night fell, the atmosphere grew heavy again. I could feel the sorrow clinging to the air, like mist. I knelt down and began to recite the rosary, my voice trembling but determined. I called out to the souls, asking for forgiveness on behalf of those who had neglected to give them peace. I begged them to move on, to find rest beyond the suffering. At midnight, the wailing started again, low, mournful, like the wind itself was crying. I continued to pray, louder this time, and the temperature dropped. My breath formed clouds in the air. I could see the shadows gathering at the door, their silhouettes pressed against the thin wooden frame. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the spirits flooded in. I froze, clutching the rosary tighter, but I forced myself to keep praying. One by one, the apparitions approached me, their faces reflecting a mix of sadness and confusion. They reached out, but this time, they did not touch me. Instead, they circled the altar, as if drawn to the flowers in the light. A woman appeared at the center, a mother cradling a child, both soaked to the bone. Her lips moved, forming silent words. I leaned closer, hearing a faint whisper. "Salamat." "Thank you." The other spirits began to follow her, their forms fading, dissolving into particles of light. I kept praying, even as tears streamed down my face, until the last soul had passed. The oppressive air lifted, replaced by a calm stillness. As dawn broke, I knew it was over. The hallway was dry, and the flowers around the altar remained fresh and vibrant. I thanked God for guiding me through the night, and for allowing me to help the lost souls find peace. I stayed in the apartment for a few more days, and every night, I prayed, not just for the spirits, but for everyone who had suffered during the disaster. I knew that some wounds never truly healed, but I also knew that remembering and honoring those who were lost would keep their memory alive. Before leaving Tacloban for good, I placed a small memorial plaque on the wall near my unit. Para sa mga kaluluwang naghahanap ng kapayapaan. For the souls seeking peace